Laura Bennett had always dreamed of a warm, peaceful home, a place filled with laughter, sunlight, and love. When she married Mark Harris, she believed she had finally found it. Mark was kind and gentle, a man who listened more than he spoke. But the house she entered as his wife carried quiet ghosts' memories that didn't belong to her. Mark had a 10-year-old son named Ethan, and the boy's late mother still seemed to live in every corner of the home. Her photographs smiled from the walls, her favorite mug sat in the kitchen cabinet, and her perfume still lingered faintly in Ethan's room. Ethan was polite but distant. He said thank you and good night, but never much more. His eyes always looked tired, as if he carried a sadness far too heavy for his age. Laura tried to talk to him, to find something that might spark a connection, but her words always seemed to fall into silence. She understood he had lost his mother only 3 years ago. Still, it hurt to feel invisible inside her own home. One morning, Laura made pancakes, hoping to start the day differently. She added chocolate chips, knowing most kids loved them. When she placed the plate in front of Ethan, he took a small bite, looked down and said quietly, "Mom used to make them smaller." It wasn't meant to be cruelette, was just the truth as he saw it. But the words pierced Laura's heart. She smiled anyway, saying, "I'll remember that next time." Though she knew the next time might not be much better. Mark tried to comfort her that evening. "He just needs time," he said softly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You're doing great, Laura," but time wasn't fixing things. Days passed, then weeks, and the distance between her and Ethan stayed the same. Every time she tried to get close, it felt like stepping into a shadow she couldn't chase away. One Saturday, Mark had to work late, leaving Laura and Ethan alone for the day. She decided to keep things light. "Want to go for a walk?" she asked, hoping the fresh air might open a small door between them. Ethan shrugged, but followed. They walked in silence for most of the way. The trees were bare, and the wind was cold, brushing against their faces. When they reached the park, Ethan sat on a bench, opening a sketchbook from his backpack. Laura sat beside him, watching quietly. His pencil moved fast and sure, filling the page with neat lines that slowly formed a picture of a treehouse. A little crooked, but full of charm. "That's really good," Laura said after a while, her voice soft. Ethan didn't look up, just kept drawing. She waited, unsure if she should say more. Finally, he whispered, "Mom used to draw with me." There it was again, that invisible wall. But this time, Laura didn't retreat. She simply nodded. "She must have been really good," she said gently. "You have her gift." Ethan glanced at her for a moment, then went back to sketching. He didn't walk away. That tiny moment felt like a victory. Later that evening, she showed Mark the sketch Ethan had made. "He's talented," she said with a quiet smile. "He just needs someone to see him." Uck nodded. "He sees you," he said. "He just doesn't know how to show it yet." That night, Laura stood by Ethan's bedroom door before going to bed. She could see the glow of his small desk lamp under the door, hear the faint sound of pencil against paper. She wanted to tell him good night, to remind him that she was there for him. But she didn't want to push too hard. So instead, she whispered softly through the door, "Good night, Ethan." There was silence. Then a faint, sleepy voice replied, "Good night." Laura, it was the first time he had said her name that way without hesitation. She smiled and went to bed with a lighter heart. But not everything was easy. The next morning, as she packed his lunch, Ethan accidentally knocked over a glass of juice, spilling it across the table. He froze, panic flashing in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "Dad doesn't like messes." Laura smiled and handed him a towel. "It's okay," she said. "Everyone makes a mess sometimes." She laughed a little as they cleaned it together, and for a brief second she saw him smile, small, shy, but real. The days that followed were slow but hopeful. Laura stopped trying to replace Ethan's mother. Instead, she tried to be herself, someone steady, kind, and patient. She learned about his favorite foods, his favorite shows, even the things that made him nervous. And slowly the air between them began to soften. One evening, while Mark was working late again, Laura found Ethan sitting on the porch steps. The sun was setting, painting the sky with orange and pink light. She brought him a cup of hot chocolate and sat beside him. "You know," she said, "I used to draw when I was your age too. Mostly horses, though they looked more like cows." Ethan laughed a short, surprised sound that warmed her heart. "Really?" he asked. "You should draw something now." Laura smiled. "Only if you promise not to laugh when it turns out terrible." He grinned. "Deal?" She took his pencil and sketch pad, started drawing, and sure enough, the horse looked ridiculous. They both burst into laughter. It wasn't much, but it felt like a beginning. After that, things started changing in small but meaningful ways. Ethan began joining her in the kitchen, asking if he could help cut vegetables or mix batter. He didn't talk much at first, but his presence was enough. He began leaving his sketchbook on the table where she could see his new drawings. Each one showed more life, more warmth, like the quiet healing of a heart, learning to trust again. One night, as she tucked him in, Ethan looked up and said softly, "Thanks for making dinner tonight." Laura paused for a second, then smiled. "You're welcome," she said. "Sleep well." When she turned off the light and walked out, her eyes filled with tears, but they were happy ones. She finally felt like she belonged, not as a replacement, but as part of something new and real. That week, when Mark returned home from another late shift, he noticed how the house felt different. There was laughter in the air, warmth in the corners that had once been quiet. He saw Laura and Ethan sitting at the table, talking softly. The space between them no longer cold but alive as he watched them from the doorway. He felt something peaceful settle in his heart. The family he thought he had lost was slowly finding its way back, not in the same form, but perhaps in a more beautiful one. Laura didn't know what the future held. But that night, as she heard Ethan's quiet goodnight echo through the hallway, she realized one thing: love doesn't always arrive easily, but when it does, it has the power to rebuild everything that was once broken. And deep down, she felt that their story had only just begun. Autumn came early that year. The air turned crisp. The trees blazed with red and gold. And the house that once felt distant began to show signs of life again. Laura could sense that something was slowly changing between her and Ethan, though neither of them talked about it. The silence that used to be heavy was now lighter, softer, like a quiet understanding that words weren't always needed. One Saturday afternoon, Laura stood in the kitchen, humming while mixing cookie dough. The smell of warm butter and sugar drifted through the hallway, wrapping the house in a cozy sweetness. She had no special reason to bake. She simply wanted to make the home feel warm. To her surprise, Ethan appeared at the kitchen doorway, peeking in with curious eyes. "Those smell good," he said softly. Laura turned, smiling as if she had been waiting for that exact moment. "You want to help me with the next batch?" she asked. Ethan hesitated for a second, then shrugged and walked toward her. It was the first time he'd offered to help with anything that wasn't schoolwork. She handed him a wooden spoon, and together they mixed the dough. "Here," she said, guiding his hand as they shaped small balls of dough. "Not too big or they won't bake, right?" Ethan nodded, concentrating hard. He didn't talk much, but he smiled a little when the first batch came out golden brown. When Mark returned from work that evening, he found them sitting at the table eating cookies and laughing about whose batch looked worse. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel divided, felt like a family. Mark stood quietly for a moment, not wanting to interrupt, his heart full at the sight of his wife and son sharing something so simple yet meaningful. Over the next few days, small changes began to appear. Ethan started leaving his door open when he drew. He joined Laura in the living room sometimes, quietly sketching while she read. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Laura didn't push him to talk. She simply gave him space to feel safe. And that gentle patience started to work. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted. Laura received a call from Ethan's school. His teacher, Mrs. Adams, sounded calm but concerned. "Ethan got into a little argument today," she said. "It's nothing serious, but it might be good if someone talked to him." Laura's heart sank. She went straight to the school, and when she saw Ethan waiting in the hallway, sitting with his backpack clutched tightly. She could tell he was upset. His cheeks were red, his eyes watery. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. Then, in a shaky voice, he said, "Some kid said I wasn't really part of a family anymore, because my mom's gone." His words hit her like a wave. She wanted to tell him everything would be fine, but she knew that sometimes comfort wasn't about words. So she took his hand gently. "That's not true, Ethan," she said. "Families don't end when someone's gone. They grow. And you have people who love Yumi and your dad." He looked up, tears filling his eyes. "But it's not the same." Other each filling the quiet spaces the other had left behind. That night, when she tucked him into bed, Ethan asked, "Do you think Mom would be okay with this?" "With what?" she asked softly. "With you being here. With me liking you." Laura's throat tightened. "I think she'd be happy," she said. "Because you're smiling again? And any mother would want that." Ethan smiled sleepily and whispered, "Good night, Mom." He stopped, catching himself, embarrassed. "I mean, Laura." Laura's heart swelled, but she didn't correct him. "Good night, Ethan," she said, turning off the light. When she walked out of the room, tears rolled down her cheeks, but they were warm, grateful tears. Over the next few days, their home felt alive again. Laughter echoed from the living room, the smell of cookies returned, and soft music filled the air. Even Mark noticed that Ethan's drawings had changed, no longer lonely scenes, but families, trees, and bright sunsets. Ethan didn't say it out loud, but in his heart, he had begun to accept that love could come in different forms. Laura didn't need to replace his mother. She just needed to be there, patient, gentle, and real. And though the bond they were building was still fragile, it was strong enough to bring color back into both their lives. As the leaves outside turned from gold to brown, Laura looked out the window one evening, watching Ethan chase their dog across the yard. Mark came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "You've done something amazing," he said softly. Laura smiled. "No," she whispered, watching Ethan laugh in the sunlight. "We have." For the first time, she truly felt like she belonged not just in Mark's life, but in Ethan's heart too. And though neither of them said it, they both knew their family was finally beginning to heal. Winter came quietly, wrapping the small town in soft white snow. By then, Laura and Ethan had grown close. Their days were calmer, filled with warmth and small laughter. But when Mark's work started sending him away for long business trips, the house changed again. For the first time, it was just the two of them, Laura and Ethan alone, for weeks at a time. At first, the silence returned. Dinners were quiet, the television murmured softly in the background, and the house seemed too big. But slowly their routines found rhythm again. Ethan would sit at the kitchen table doing homework while Laura cooked. Sometimes he'd tell her about his classes or his art projects, his voice growing more open each day. They began to share small things: movie nights, board games, even baking new recipes that usually ended in laughter and a bit of chaos. One snowy evening, the power suddenly went out. The whole house went dark except for the soft orange glow of the fireplace. Laura lit a few candles and found Ethan sitting on the couch hugging a blanket. "Looks like it's just us and the storm," she said, smiling. Ethan grinned a little. "At least we don't have to do homework tonight." They sat together near the fire, wrapped in warmth while the snow fell outside. Laura picked up one of Ethan's favorite adventure books and started reading aloud. He leaned closer, listening, his eyes reflecting the firelight. When she glanced down, his head had gently rested against her shoulder. That small gesture, simple and pure, melted every remaining distance between them. In that moment, she felt something deeper than comfort. She felt like she truly belonged in his world. Over the next few days, their bond grew stronger. They talked about everything: school, dreams, even small secrets. Ethan told her he wanted to be an artist, maybe travel one day and paint the world. Laura listened, encouraging him. "You can do anything if you believe in yourself," she said softly. When Mark returned home after 2 weeks away, he immediately noticed the closeness between them. Ethan greeted Laura first when he came home from school, and their laughter filled the kitchen. Mark was happy, but something in his eyes showed uncertainty. That night, after Ethan went to bed, he sat beside Laura. "You've done so much for him," he said quietly. "But I don't want him to get confused. He's still missing his mom." Laura froze for a moment. "You think I'm confusing him?" she asked gently. Mark sighed. "No, it's not that. I want to be sure he understands that you're not trying to replace her." Laura nodded, though the words stung. "I never wanted to replace her, Mark. I just wanted to love him." Ethan had been walking down the hall to get a glass of water when he heard their voices. He didn't catch everything, but the words "not trying to replace her" echoed in his mind. To him, it sounded like they were talking about his mom and about him. His heart filled with confusion and pain. He thought Laura might have been pretending to care. The next day, Ethan was cold again. He barely spoke at breakfast. When Laura asked about school, he answered with one word: "Fine." That afternoon, he stayed in his room, door closed, sketchbook hidden. The laughter that once filled the house vanished. Replaced by silence, Laura tried to reach him. She knocked softly on his door. "Ethan, can we talk?" she asked. "I don't know what I did, but I want to understand." Kate didn't answer. She waited for a while, then quietly walked away, her heart heavy. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat in the living room, staring at the fire, wondering what had gone wrong. The next few days were difficult. Ethan avoided her, and Laura gave him space, hoping he'd come around. Mark noticed the tension, but didn't know what had happened. Laura didn't tell him about the conversation Ethan might have overheard. She didn't want to make things worse. One evening, after school, Ethan came home looking upset. He dropped his backpack and went straight to his room. Later, Laura found a torn sketch in the trash. It was a picture he had drawn of the three of them, ripped right down the middle. She sat on the floor holding the pieces, tears falling quietly. She had worked so hard to build this bond, and now it was slipping away. That night, Mark had to leave again for another short trip. Before he left, he said, "Don't give up on him, Laura. He loves you more than he knows how to say." She nodded, though her heart was full of doubt. A few days later, a snowstorm hit. The wind howled outside, and the streets were empty. Laura made soup and waited, but Ethan didn't come home from his friend's house. Her worry grew with every passing hour. Finally, just before dark, she saw his figure walking through the snow. Coat pulled tight, cheeks red from the cold. When he walked in, she rushed to him. "Ethan, you scared me. I was about to go look for you." He looked at her, surprised. "You were." "Of course I was," she said, kneeling to wipe the snow from his face. "You think I wouldn't worry?" He stared at her for a moment, the anger in his eyes softening. "I thought you didn't want me around anymore?" Laura's voice trembled. "Why would you ever think that?" "I heard you and Dad talking," he said. "You said you weren't trying to replace my mom. I thought it meant you didn't really care." Understanding hit her all at once. She took his hands and said gently, "Oh, Ethan, no, that's not what I meant. I could never replace your mom, no one could. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. I love you for you. You don't have to choose between her and me." He didn't say anything for a while. Then quietly he whispered, "I missed you." Laura smiled through her tears. "I missed you too." She pulled him into a hug, and for the first time in weeks, he hugged her back. That night, as snow fell outside, he sat by the fire again just like before. This time, there were no walls between them. Ethan showed her his newest drawings, including one of the night sky with 3 stars shining together. "This one's for us," he said shyly. "Mom, Dad, and you." Laura felt her eyes fill again, but she didn't hide it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "And so are you." When Mark returned home and saw the two of them laughing together again, his worries faded. He realized that love wasn't something that replaced or confused, it healed. Later that night, as Laura stood by the window watching the snow, she thought about how love could be fragile, misunderstood and tested, but still survive. What they had built wasn't perfect, but it was real. Ethan had opened his heart again. And she had learned that love doesn't need permission, it just needs patience. Outside, the storm finally stopped. Inside, warmth returned to their home. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt right again. Spring came like a quiet promise. The snow melted, the trees came alive again, and the air carried the scent of new beginnings. By then, Laura and Ethan's relationship had healed from the storm that nearly broke it. They were talking again, laughing again, sharing little moments that made the house feel alive. But neither of them said out loud how much the last few months had changed them. Some things were just felt, not spoken. One morning, Ethan received a letter from his school about an upcoming art exhibition. His drawings had been selected for display, a big honor for a boy his age. Laura was thrilled. "That's amazing, Ethan. I'm so proud of you," she said, hugging him. He smiled, shy but excited. "Thanks," he said. "But can you not come? It's mostly for students and parents. I don't want people asking questions." Laura understood what he meant. Some kids still whispered about him not having his real mom, and he didn't want to face that again. So she nodded and said softly, "If that's what you want, I'll stay home. But know this side loved to be there, cheering for you." Ethan looked unsure, but didn't say more. When the day of the exhibition came, Laura couldn't sit still. She told herself she'd only stop by quietly, just to see his work from a distance. She didn't plan to talk to him or make things awkward. So, dressed simply and with her heart pounding, she went to the school. The hall was full of colorful paintings and proud parents. Laura walked slowly, her eyes scanning the displays until she saw Ethan's drawing. Placed right in the center of the room, she froze. It was a picture of 3 people standing beneath a tree, sunlight breaking through the leaves. A man, a boy, and a woman, all smiling. The caption underneath said, "Home again." Laura's eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. Every line of the drawing told their story: loss, pain, healing, and love reborn. It wasn't just art. It was Ethan's heart on paper. When Ethan saw her standing there, his first reaction was surprise. Then guilt crossed his face. He walked toward her slowly. "I told you not to come," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "I know," Laura said softly. "I just wanted to see your work. It's beautiful, Ethan, truly." He looked down. "I didn't mean for you to see that one. I just drew what felt right." Laura wiped her eyes, smiling gently. "You drew what's real," she said. He looked at her, confusion and emotion mixing on his face. "I didn't want you to think I didn't care," he whispered. "I was just scared. I thought if I got too close to you, Dad might think I was forgetting Mom, or that you'd stop loving me if he got mad about it." Laura's voice shook as she said, "Ethan, love doesn't replace, it adds. You don't have to choose between memories and new love. You'll always have your mom, always. But you'll have me too, if you want." For a moment, Ethan didn't speak. Then tears spilled down his cheeks. He stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "I do want," he said through a shaky breath. "I really do." Laura held him, her heart overflowing. Around them, the sound of chatter and laughter faded into the background. In that moment, nothing else mattered. When Mark arrived later that evening, he found them sitting on the couch together, still dressed from the exhibition, smiling as they looked through Ethan's sketchbook. "So, how was the big art show?" Mark asked with a grin. Ethan looked up, his eyes bright. "It was good. I drew something for us. Want to see?" He showed his father the home again drawing. Mark looked at it for a long time, his expression softening. Then he said, "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." He glanced at Laura, his voice low. "You've both come so far." That night, when Ethan fell asleep, Mark and Laura sat quietly together. The house was peaceful, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock. Mark reached for her hand. "You know," he said, "I was afraid at first. I didn't want him to lose his mother twice, once to death, and once to change. But you've given him something she would have wanted most: peace." Laura smiled, her eyes glistening. "He gave me that too," she said. "He taught me what love really means. It's not just about being needed. It's about showing up even when it's hard." From that day, things truly began to feel different. Ethan no longer hid his emotions. He'd hug Laura before leaving for school, tease her about her terrible singing in the kitchen, and draw pictures of their small family together. He even started calling her mom sometimes softly, almost by accident, but with meaning every time. One evening, as they prepared for dinner, Ethan ran into the kitchen holding his latest drawing. "Look," he said proudly. It showed a small family at a table, laughing. "That's us," he said. "I think Mom would have liked you." Laura's throat tightened, but she managed to smile. "I hope so," she whispered, "because I like her son very much." Later that week, the three of them took a short trip to a nearby cabin by the lake. It was simple, quiet, and peaceful. They spent the weekend fishing, playing cards, and roasting marshmallows by the fire. At night, they'd sit under the stars, wrapped in blankets, sharing stories. Ethan told them about a dream he had to one day become an art teacher and help other kids find comfort in creating. "That's a wonderful dream," Laura said. "You'll make it come true." He smiled at her. "As long as you promise to come to my first art show." "Always," she said. That night, while Ethan slept in the next room, Mark looked at Laura and said, "You saved both of us. Me from my guilt and Ethan from his sadness." Laura shook her head. "No," she said softly. "We saved each other." Back home, life settled into a steady rhythm. There were no more walls, no more misunderstandings, just love, laughter, and small everyday moments that made their family feel whole. One Sunday morning, Laura walked into the living room to find Ethan asleep on the couch, sketchbook open beside him. On the page was a drawing of her and Mark standing behind him as he painted. Above it, in neat handwriting, were the words, "My family, the one I chose to." Tears filled her eyes as she closed the sketchbook gently. She sat beside him and brushed his hair from his forehead, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." Ethan stirred and smiled sleepily. "Love you, Mom," he mumbled before drifting back to sleep. At that moment, Laura knew the journey had come full circle. The pain, the patience, the heartbreak had all led here to this quiet, beautiful peace. She wasn't just a stepmother anymore. She was a mother, a friend, and a home. When Mark joined them a few minutes later, coffee in hand, he saw them together and smiled. "You know," he said softly, "I think this is exactly how it was meant to be." Laura nodded, her eyes still on Ethan. "Yes," she whispered. "Love found its way." And as sunlight poured into the room, warming the faces of a family that had once been broken, it was clear that their bond born from patience, pain, and love was something no storm could ever break again. It wasn't the family Laura expected when she married Mark. It was something even better, a family built not by blood, but by choice, trust, and love that refused to give up, and for the rest of her life. She would remember that love doesn't always begin is a lie, but when it's real, it never fades.